Hi, this is Dr. Bev Knox, your psychology exam study buddy. I'm here to help you ace your psychology exam. Okay, so today we're going to focus on the basic consciousness concepts. And it's not a large section, so what I'm going to do for episode 5 is combine theory and your exam questions together. Normally I separate these two and have two episodes. But for episode 5, I'm going to be your study guide in the first half of this episode. And the second half, I'm going to go over actual questions and answers on your psychology exam, focusing on consciousness. Okay, so let's get started. At its beginning, psychology was the description and explanation of states of consciousness. But during the first half of the 20th century, the difficulty of scientifically studying consciousness led many psychologists, including those in the emerging school of behaviorism, to turn to direct observation of behavior. But by the 1960s, psychology had nearly lost consciousness and was defining itself as the science of behavior. Now, consciousness was likened to a car's speedometer. It doesn't make the car go. It just reflects what's happening. All right? So in about 1960, a little after 1960, mental concepts emerged and neuroscience advances linked brain activity to things like sleeping, dreaming, and other mental states. So then researchers began studying consciousness altered by drugs, hypnosis, and medication. Okay? So psychologists all of a sudden were affirming that there is a very important segment in psychology that we need to focus on, and that is the focus on cognition. Cognition or mental processes itself. So psychology was regaining consciousness. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is know the definition of consciousness. And consciousness is our subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. Now, in an earlier episode, I told you that you definitely need to know the difference between subjective and objective anything, okay? So with objective, it's more like the information is more factual, it's more research-based, and hopefully there's very little biases in objective information. But with subjective information, it's more about ourselves, what we think, what we have experienced. So with consciousness, the definition is our subjective awareness. Okay, so what we're aware of, our subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. So, define consciousness. And I want you to really, really think about these definitions when I ask you. I want you to either, say it out loud, of course, if you're by yourself, or in your mind, because you're going to be repeating these definitions over and over and over with me, and that's how you transfer information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. And we want this information to stay in your long-term memory, okay? So I want you to rehearse with me each and every time and time again that you listen to these to these episodes, okay? All right, so define consciousness. Consciousness is our subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. What is consciousness? That's right. You're absolutely right. It's our subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. Consciousness is our subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. And most psychologists do define consciousness as our subjective what? Awareness. Very good. Our subjective awareness of whom? Of ourselves, and also what? Our environment. That's right. So this awareness allows us to assemble information from many sources as we reflect on our past, we adapt to our present, and plan our what? Future. That's right. It also focuses our attention when we learn a complex concept or behavior. Like when we learn to drive, we focus on the car and on the traffic. And with practice, driving becomes what? Semi-automatic, freeing us to focus our attention on other things. Now, over time, we fit between different states of consciousness to include normal awakening awareness and various altered states, which we'll talk about today. So today's science explores the biology of consciousness. Wow, we're getting a little deep now, aren't we? The biology of consciousness. And evolutionary psychologists presume that consciousness offers a reproductive advantage. Consciousness helps us to cope with novel situations and act in our long-term interests rather than merely seeking short-term pleasure and avoiding pain. So consciousness also promotes our survival by anticipating how we seem to others and helping us read their minds. Now, one thing that you have to understand, such explanation still leaves us with what researchers call the hard problem. Okay, so we know that our brain cells are jabbering to one another and create our awareness of the quote-unquote taste of different foods and the idea of infinity and feeling, the fright. We know all this, okay? But the question is how consciousness arises from our material brain is one of life's deepest mysteries because we still don't know. We don't know. But scientists assume, in the words of neuroscience Martin Minsky, that the mind is what the brain does. So we just don't know how it does what it does, okay? But there is something that you need to know. Even with all the world's technology, and we do have a lot of technology today, we still don't have a clue of how to make a conscious robot. We just don't know. And of course, we know what consciousness means, right? Let me quiz you again. What is consciousness? Our subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment. Yet today's cognitive neuroscience, now this is a new word I just threw in there that you're going to learn about. Today's cognitive neuroscience, which is the interdisciplinary study of the brain activity linked with our mental processes. All right, let's go over this definition a few times. So, cognitive neuroscience is the interdisciplinary study of the brain activity linked with cognition. And as I mentioned before in another episode, cognition includes what? Thinking, right? That word, that's the magic word, including perception, thinking, memory, and language. So, cognitive neuroscience is the interdisciplinary study of the brain activity linked with cognition. So, brain activity linked with cognition is cognitive neuroscience. And cognitive includes what? Perception, thinking, memory, and language. What is cognitive neuroscience? The interdisciplinary study of the brain activity linked with what? That's right, linked with cognition. And cognition is what? What does it include? Perception, thinking, memory, and language. Okay, great. So let's move on. So there is a couple of definitions that you must know. The first one is selective attention. Okay, so we're going to learn about selective attention right now. It is the focusing of conscious awareness on a particular stimulus. Selective attention is the focusing of conscious awareness on a particular stimulus. So, through selective attention, our awareness focuses like a flashlight beam on a minute aspect of all that we experience. We may think we can fully attend to a conversation or a class lecture while checking and returning text messages. And I know some of you guys do that. You guys are texting in class, right? And you need to stop that. Not only is it disrespectful to the teacher or yourself paying all that money for your class, but there you are, you're texting in class. Stop it. But I know you think that you could still pay attention during lecture and check in and return in your text messages, but actually our consciousness forces, it redirects, our focus on but one thing at a time. I know that contradicts the whole multitasking thing. I know that. But in regards to your exam and getting it correctly, we'll talk about multitasking later in a different episode. But right now, in regards to this exam and you acing it, please note in regards to selective attention, okay, our conscious focuses on one thing at a time. Okay, so by one estimate, our five senses, and do you know what the five senses are? I'm hoping you do. We'll get to that when we go in depth in regards to sensation and perception. What are the five senses? Did you say hearing, seeing, taste, smell? Oh, okay, wonderful. So hearing, taste, smell, see, what else? Touch? Oh, okay. Look at you. Okay. All right. So in regards to our five senses, we know that we take in bits of information, actually 11 million bits of information per second, of which we consciously process only about 40. Yet our mind's unconscious tract intuitively makes great use of the other, 10,999,960 bits. That's a lot. That's a lot of information. But anyway, what captures our limited attention, right? So there are some things that do that. Things we deem important. The classic example of selective attention is the cocktail party effect. I'm sure we've all experienced this. Your ability to attend to one voice among a sea of other voices, right? So the cocktail party effect is your ability to attend only to one thing in a sea of a whole other different type of things, okay? But what happens when another voice speaks your name? Your cognition radar operating in your mind's other track and in your right frontal cortex instantly brings that unattended voice into your consciousness. So again, selective attention is the focusing of conscious awareness on a particular stimulus. What is selective attention? The focusing of conscious awareness on a particular stimulus. Okay, so let's move on to inattentional blindness. Not attentional blindness, but inattentional blindness, which is failing to see visible objects when our attention is directed elsewhere. Inattentional blindness is failing to see visible objects when our attention is directed elsewhere. So, at the level of conscious awareness, we are, quote unquote, blind to all but a tiny sliver of visual stimuli. Now, this is called inattentional blindness, failing to see visible objects when our attention is directed elsewhere. Next, let's talk about change blindness, failing to notice changes in the environment, a form of inattentional blindness. So change blindness is a form of inattentional blindness. And as mentioned before, inattentional blindness is failing to see visible objects that our attention is when our attention is directed elsewhere. And change blindness is failing to notice changes in the environment, and it is a form of inattentional blindness. Now, one of the grand idea in regards to recent cognitive neuroscience is that much of our brain work occurs offstage, out of sight. So perception, memory, thinking, language, and attitudes all operate on two levels of consciousness, okay? It's a deliberate high road is what they call it, and an unconscious automatic low road. So the high road is reflective. The low road is intuitive. Today's researchers call this dual processing. We know more than we know We know. Okay? So, dual processing is the principle that information is often simultaneously processed on separate conscious and unconscious tracks. Now we're digging a little deeper here, okay? So now we're not only talking about consciousness, but we're also diving a little bit into the unconscious. So dual processing is the principle that information is often simultaneously at the same time being processed on separate conscious and unconscious tracks. So if you are a driver, okay, consider how you move to the right lane. I mean, think about it in your head if you're a driver. Drivers know this unconsciously, but cannot accurately explain it. So most say they would, bank to the right, then straighten out, a procedure that would actually steer them off the road. But in reality, an experienced driver, after moving right, automatically reverses the steering wheel just a little bit, just as far to the left of center. And only when, and only then they would return to the center position. Okay? So this is done automatically, an experienced driver. So again, dual processing is the principle that information is often simultaneously, and that means at the same time, being processed on separate conscious and unconscious tracks. Now, the next definition you need to know is blind sight. Blind sight, one word, blind sight. A condition in which a person can respond to a visual stimulus without consciously experiencing it. What? What did you say? Okay, so blind sight is a condition in which a person can respond to a visual stimulus without consciously experiencing it. Are you kidding me? What? Really? Yes. Now, let's move on to parallel processing. Parallel processing is processing many aspects of a problem simultaneously, generally used to process well-learned information or to solve easy problems. Parallel processing is processing many aspects of a problem simultaneously. At the same time, they're processing these aspects of a problem, generally used to process well-learned information, just like you're doing right now. Shh, we won't tell anybody. Just like you're doing right now. Generally used to process well-learned information or to solve easy problems. So, unconscious parallel processing is faster than conscious processing. But both are essential, okay? So parallel processing enables your mind to take care of routine business. Parallel processing, what is that again? Processing many aspects of a problem simultaneously at the same time, generally used to process well-learned information or to solve problems easily. And parallel processing enables your mind to take care of routine business. But sequential processing is best for solving new problems, which requires our focused attention on one thing at a time. So you have parallel processing, And then you have sequential processing. And sequential processing processes one aspect of a problem at a time, generally used to process new information or to solve difficult problems. So let's go over this again, because we need to know the difference between parallel processing and sequential processing. So parallel processing, which means processing many aspects of a problem simultaneously, generally used to process well-learned information or to solve easy problems. And parallel processing enables your mind to take care of routine business. Now, sequential processing processes one aspect of a problem at a time. So, parallel processing processes many aspects of a problem at a time. Sequential processing processes one aspect of a problem at a time. And generally, sequential processing is used to process new information or to solve difficult problems. With parallel processing, it is generally used to process well-learned information or to solve easy problems. So parallel processing is used to process well-learned information, and sequential processing is generally used to process new information. Okay? All right, I think we're ready to go into some quiz, some general psychology exam questions in regards to basic consciousness concepts. What do you think? You think you're ready for me to quiz you? To go over some actual psychology exam questions with you? I think so. All right, so let's get started. Since 1960, psychology has regained an interest in consciousness as psychologists of all persuasions affirm the importance of cognition. Since 1960, psychology has regained an interest in consciousness as psychologists of all persuasions affirmed the importance of cognition. Don't forget, for a while there, from about in the 1920s to about 1960, it was all about behaviorism. They didn't want to know anything in regards to consciousness. They only focused on what they could observe, the behaviorists. And we saw that about 1960, there was a shift again in wanting to know more about cognition in regards to our thinking processes. So, since 1960, psychology has regained an interest in consciousness as psychologists of all persuasions affirmed the importance of cognition. Consciousness is what? What is consciousness? It is our awareness of ourselves and our environment. What is consciousness? Our awareness of ourselves and our environment. A specific area that focuses on the connection between brain activity and mental processes is known as cognitive neuroscience. A specific area that focuses on the connections between brain activity and mental processes is known as cognitive neuroscience. Which specialty area would be most interested in identifying the cortical activation patterns associated with a person's perception of different objects? Cognitive neuroscience. The simultaneous processing of information at both conscious and unconscious levels is called dual processing. The simultaneous processing of information at both, that's the clue right there, at both conscious and unconscious levels is called dual processing. A condition in which a person can respond to a visual stimulus without consciously experiencing it is known as blind sight. A condition in which a person can respond to a visual stimulus without consciously experiencing it is known as blind sight. Although unable to report the width of a block in front of her, a woman identified as DF could grasp the block with just the right finger-thumb distance. Her experience best illustrates what? Blind sight. A vision perception track enables most people to recognize objects at the same time that a visual action track enables them to avoid bumping into objects. This best illustrates dual processing. A capacity to monitor simultaneously the color, shape, and motion of an object best illustrates what? Parallel processing. A capacity to monitor simultaneously, meaning at the same time, the color, shape, and motion of an object best illustrates parallel processing. Consciousness is to unconsciousness as sequential processing is to parallel processing. Consciousness is to unconsciousness as sequential processing, focusing on one at a time, is to parallel processing. Compared with unconscious information processing, conscious information processing is relatively slow and especially effective for solving new problems. Compared with unconscious information processing, conscious information processing is relatively slow and especially effective for solving new problems. Even if musically inclined, it is difficult to tap a steady 3 times with your left hand while tapping 4 times with your right. Because why? Both require what? Yes, both tasks require conscious attention. So why don't you try it? Even if you're not musically inclined, let's try this. Tap steadily 3 times with your left hand, while at the same time tapping 4 times with your right hand. Go ahead, try it. Try to tap 3 times with your left hand, and at the same time tapping 4 times with your right hand. It's difficult, I know. So even if musically inclined, it is difficult. It is difficult to tap a steady 3 times. That's the word, steady 3 times with your left hand, while tapping 4 times with your right hand, because both tasks require conscious attention. You have to focus on each. Focusing conscious awareness on a particular stimulus is called selective attention. Focusing conscious awareness on a particular stimulus is called selective attention. Our inability to consciously process all the sensory information available to us at any single point in time best illustrates the necessity of selective attention. Our inability to consciously process all the sensory information available to us at any single given point best illustrates selective attention. While reading a novel, Raoul isn't easily distracted by the sounds of the TV or even by his brother's loud arguments. This best illustrates what? Selective attention, right? He isn't easily distracted. So even while other things is going on in the background, the TV and his brothers arguing or fighting or whatever, he's able to pay attention and read his novel. So while reading a novel, Raoul isn't easily distracted by the sounds of the TV or even by his brother's loud arguments. This best illustrates selective attention. The cocktail party effect provides an example of selective attention. You got to know this one, okay? Definitely, this one's on your quiz. The cocktail party effect provides an example of selective attention. A bank teller was so distracted by the sight of a bank robber's weapon that she failed to perceive important features of the criminal's physical appearance. This illustrates what? Selective attention. A bank teller was so distracted by the sight of the bank robber's weapon, she was focusing on the weapon, that she failed to perceive important features of the criminal's physical appearance. This best illustrates selective attention. When their attention is focused on a task, such as reading, people are less likely to blink their eyes, believe it or not. When their attention is focused on a task, such as reading, people are less likely to blink their eyes. Drivers are slower to detect traffic signals if they are talking on a cell phone, which we should not be doing unless if it's hands-free. But drivers are slower to detect traffic signals if they are talking on a cell phone. This best illustrates the impact of selective attention. Failing to see visible objects when our attention is directed elsewhere is called inattentional blindness. Failing to see visual objects when our attention is directed elsewhere is called inattentional blindness. If asked to watch a video and press a key each time a red-shirted player passed a basketball, most research participants remained unaware of an umbrella-toting woman strolling across the video screen. This illustrated dual processing. Okay, so I'm going to now give you another little separate quiz, and you should know these. You should know all of these. You should get all of these correct. Are you ready? Okay, here goes. And I'm going to be going a little bit faster now, okay? The school of thought in psychology that turned away from the study of consciousness during the first half of the last century was behaviorism. The school of thought in psychology that turned away from the study of consciousness during the first half of the last century was behaviorism. The simultaneous processing of information on many parallel tracks is most closely associated with unconscious mental activity. The simultaneous processing of information on many parallel tracks is most closely associated with unconscious mental activity. Although we may be unaware of our gender prejudices, they often influence the way we consciously perceive males and females. This best illustrates dual processing. A teenager texting while crossing the street is not likely to notice a car rounding the corner and about to cross her path. This best illustrates the impact of selective attention. Christy failed to notice that she received her ice cream in a sugar cone rather than a waffle cone that she had requested. She later indicated to another customer that she preferred sugar cones over waffle cones. Christy's behavior most clearly illustrates choice blindness. Professor R studies how activating specific regions of the brain affects dream content. Her work best illustrates the subfield of cognitive neuroscience. A car driver's ability to navigate a familiar route while carrying on an animated conversation with passengers best illustrates the importance of dual processing. Consciousness is most important for the correct performance of behaviors that are novel and challenging. Consciousness is most important for the correct performance of behaviors that are novel and challenging. Selective attention is best illustrated by the cocktail party effect. Selective attention is best illustrated by the cocktail party effect. Selective attention is best illustrated by change blindness. Selective attention is best illustrated by change blindness. Consciousness includes which of the following? Focused attention, sleeping, hypnosis. Consciousness includes all of the following: focused attention, sleeping, and hypnosis. At its beginning, psychology focused on the study of consciousness. So, at its beginning, psychology focused on the study of consciousness. Okay, the perceptual error in which we fail to see an object when our attention is directed elsewhere is inattentional blindness. The perceptual error in which we fail to see an object when our attention is directed elsewhere is inattentional blindness. Oops, I was trying to trick you there. The perceptual error in which we fail to see an object when our attention is directed elsewhere is inattentional blindness. Consciousness is defined as our awareness of ourselves and our environment. Consciousness is defined as our awareness of ourselves and our environment. Well, this is it. We have completed this section. This is Dr. Bev Knox, your psychology exam study buddy, and this is episode 5. So we will be diving into episode 6, which is all about sleep and dreams.